right, get ready for a wild one. Today's deep dive is all about Belarusian auto service, but not one that might immediately spring to mind.
What you got for us?
So I'm looking at this headline, right? It screams, "Deceived in car service, you are to blame." Can you believe that? Talk about a dramatic intro.
Wow. Subtlety isn't their strong suit, is it?
Right. And that's just one article in this stack you sent over. But here's the thing. It's actually written by someone who works in Belarusian auto service. They're calling for a serious reality check on the whole image of the industry.
No, that's interesting. Almost like an inside job, turning the tables. What's the angle?
Well, get the author's highlighting all these positive changes happening that honestly I completely missed. Like a huge surge in new distributors offering specialized services, more and more training centers popping up, even a push toward automation in the industry.
That is interesting. It suggests an industry that's not just treading water, but actively trying to improve.
That's exactly it. It's like that quiet kid in class who's been acing all the exams without anyone noticing. And that really got me thinking, we often miss those positive shifts, especially with industries that get portrayed negatively.
Yeah, it's like the old saying, good news is no news, right? We're wired to focus on the negative.
Totally. And this is where the deep dive gets really fascinating. The author lays out 4 main negative ways that Belarusian auto service gets portrayed in the media. First up, you've got the classic deception angle, think mechanics, running scams, ripping everyone off.
Yes, playing on that universal fear of getting cheated, especially with something as essential as our cars.
Exactly. Then there's the whole industry problems narrative,
Right.
where the entire sector is painted as this chaotic mess that needs to be reined in.
Right, tapping into that desire for order, for someone to be in control of the chaos.
You got it. And just when you thought it couldn't get any more dramatic, we hit the shadow business angle.
Right.
We're talking articles going all in on illegal garages, tax evasion, basically every mechanic's public enemy number one.
Creating this atmosphere of suspicion, making everyone wonder who they can trust.
And to top it all off, it's like they think every mechanic is fresh out of a bad action movie, swigging vodka 1 minute, then joyriding in a client's car the next.
The infamous drunk mechanic trope. You gotta wonder where these stereotypes come from.
Right. It's kind of comical, but also a bit concerning how easily we buy into these extreme portrayals.
It's like judging an entire orchestra based on one off-key violin, isn't it?
Perfect analogy. And this is where that article really hit home for me. The author isn't denying there are bad apples. They're challenging us to look beyond those negative headlines and acknowledge the positive stories that almost never get told.
It's about balanced reporting, right? Every industry has its issues, but focusing solely on the negative creates a distorted picture.
Absolutely. And to illustrate this, the author actually offers some examples of what those positive stories could look like mechanics going above and beyond for their customers, workshops that are spotless, even things like customer appreciation efforts.
It's a good reminder that behind every business are real people trying to do their best.
Exactly. And sometimes those small acts of kindness make a world of difference. The author even shared a personal story about a positive experience they had at a motorcycle repair shop.
Oh, I'd love a good anecdote. What happened?
So they had this issue with their motorcycle, right? And not only did the shop fix it quickly and efficiently, but they actually loaded it onto a van and delivered it straight to their door.
Wow, talk about going the extra mile. See, those are the stories we need to hear more of.
I know, right? It just goes to show those positive experiences often go unreported. Not because they aren't happening, but because they don't fit that sensational narrative.
It's like they say, good news travels fast, but bad news has a direct flight.
Ain't that the truth? And this whole deep dive got me thinking about all the other areas where we might be falling into this trap of biased reporting.
It's a bigger conversation about media literacy, isn't it? How do we develop a more critical eye?
Exactly. If we're not careful, we get so caught up in the headlines that we miss the bigger picture entirely.
It's like driving with blinders on, only seeing what's right in front of us. What if we took a step back, widened our view?
It's a good question to ask, especially when we come across information that just reinforces our existing biases or anxieties. We'll definitely have to unpack that a bit more. But for now, let's take a quick break and we'll be right back after this. So we were talking about how easy it is to get caught up in those negative narratives about, well, anything really.
It's true. Our brains seem wired to latch onto the bad stuff.
Yeah, and when you combine that with like how the media presents information, well, things get even more interesting. I mean, look at that headline I mentioned earlier, "Deceived in car service, you are to blame." It's almost like they're saying it's your fault for being suspicious.
Right. Talk about adding insult to injury. It's like they're shifting the responsibility away from any potential wrongdoing and placing it squarely on the customer.
It's wild. And it's not just that one. There was another one that read, garage business, champions of the shadow market. Like, come on.
It's almost comical how over the top it is, but I guess that's what grabs your attention, right? Strong language, dramatic imagery, it all plays into our emotions.
Yeah, it's easy to get swept up in it.
Yeah.
But the author of this article, they make a really good point. They're not denying that there are problems in the industry. Instead, they're saying, hey, why don't we shine a light on the positive stuff too?
Yeah.
You know, the stories that don't usually make headlines.
It's all about balance, isn't it? Every field has its good and bad apples. But if we only focus on the bad, we miss out on the whole picture.
Exactly. And to their point, they actually give some examples of what those positive stories could look like. Think about it. Mechanics going above and beyond to help out a customer. Workshops that are clean and well organized. Even customer appreciation events. Those things don't exactly scream scandal, but they matter.
They really do. It's a good reminder that behind every business, there are real people just trying to make a living and hopefully make a positive impact.
For sure. And sometimes those small acts of kindness can make a huge difference in someone's day. You know, the author even shared a personal anecdote about a time they had a really positive experience with the motorcycle repair shop.
Ooh, I love a good anecdote. Tell me more.
So they had some trouble with their motorcycle, right? And the shop, not only did they fix it super quickly, but get this, they loaded it onto a van and delivered it right to their doorstep.
Wow, now that's what I call customer service. It's those little things that can really make a difference.
I know, right? It just goes to show that those positive experiences often go unnoticed, not because they're not happening, but because they don't fit into that typical narrative of drama and negativity.
It's true. It's like that old saying, good news travels fast, but bad news has a direct flight. We're drawn to the sensational, the negative, the things that make us question and worry.
And that's what makes this whole deep dive so interesting, right? It's got me thinking about all the other areas where might be falling into this trap of only seeing the negative side of things. It's like we're programmed to focus on what could go wrong instead of what's going right.
It's true. And it's not just about individual stories or industries either. It's about how we process information, how we form opinions, and ultimately how we see the world around us. Maybe it's time we all put on our rose-colored glasses for a bit, eh?
Maybe. But seriously, developing a more critical eye is so important, especially in today's world where information overload is the norm. We got to learn to filter through the noise and find those balanced perspectives.
Absolutely. And that's where, a healthy dose of skepticism and curiosity can come in handy. Question everything, look for different viewpoints, and don't be afraid to dig a little deeper.
Easier said than done sometimes, right? But it's definitely something to strive for. After all, the truth is often far more complex and interesting than any headline could ever convey. It really is amazing how much our perception shapes, well, everything really, right? Like when you stop and think about it.
Absolutely. It's like that old saying, we don't see the world as it is, we see it as we are.
Right. And when you start to question those perceptions, those ingrained biases, well, that's when things get really interesting.
Exactly. It's like putting on a new pair of glasses and seeing the world in a whole new light. But how do we actually do that? How do we break free from those negative narratives and develop a more critical eye?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? What are your thoughts? Where do we even begin?
Well, I think a good place to start is by asking yourself, who benefits from this narrative? Is there an agenda at play here? Maybe a competitor trying to smear their rivals, or a group with a vested interest in painting a certain picture?
Ooh, that's a good point. It's like a detective game, isn't it? Looking for those hidden motives, those subtle clues that tell a different story.
Exactly. And while you're at it, don't forget to consider the source. Are you getting your information from a reputable publication known for balanced reporting, or from a tabloid that thrives on sensationalism?
Oh, right. Just because it's in print or online these days doesn't mean it's the gospel truth. Gotta be discerning, right? Like, is this source trying to inform me or just trying to grab my attention with a catchy headline?
Exactly. And finally, I think it's crucial to look for what's missing. Are there alternative perspectives that aren't being represented? Are there positive stories being overshadowed by the negative? Sometimes you have to dig a little deeper to find them.
It's like they say, there are two sides to every story, and then there's the truth.
Well said. And that's what makes this whole deep dive so insightful. It reminds us that the world is rarely black and white. It's full of nuances and complexities that we often miss when we only focus on the negative.
Absolutely. So to our listeners out there, the next time you encounter a news story that feels a little too neat, a little too sensational, remember what we've talked about today. Ask those tough questions, challenge those assumptions, and who knows, you might just discover a whole new side of the story.
Well said. Curiosity and a healthy dose of skepticism. Those are the keys to navigating today's information landscape.
Couldn't agree more. Well, on that note, we're going to wrap things up for today. Thanks for joining us for another deep dive. Until next time, keep those minds curious, folks.